Before we get into the details of this case, I want to establish something for context. Maritime deaths involving intimate partners follow a very specific investigative pattern.
She had the keys. That is the account. 4 words that explain everything. Why the engine stopped, why he couldn't go back for her, why she disappeared into dark water and was never found. She had the keys. An engine safety lanyard is a short cord, 6 to 18 inches when fully extended. One end clips to the ignition. The other end clips to the operator's body. Its entire purpose, the only reason it exists, is to stop the engine if the person controlling the boat goes overboard. It is designed for the operator. It is designed to be worn by the person at the engine. It is physically short enough to connect the operator to the ignition switch while they sit at the stern. It does not reach the passenger position at the front of the boat. It is not designed to. It is designed for one person in one specific position. Lynette Hooker was a passenger. Her daughter has stated publicly and on record that Lynette never drove the boat. Always Brian. Every time. According to the account, when Lynette went into the water on the night of April 4th, 2026, she was wearing the engine safety lanyard. The lanyard pulled the key from the ignition. The engine died. Brian couldn't power back to her. She had the keys. The device designed for the driver was on the passenger who never drove. And the presence of that device on that passenger is the specific mechanical fact that explains why a 55-year-old woman was left in dark, rough water in the Bahamas, and why her
6 to 8 inches. Designed for the operator. She never operated that boat.
Husband couldn't reach her. That is not a theory. That is the internal logic of the account. And the question that logic produces is the one investigation is working to answer right now. How did that lanyard get there? If you haven't heard about this case yet, subscribe to the Obscure Report right now and turn on notifications. This is an active investigation. It is moving fast. And what I'm about to lay out goes significantly deeper than anything the daily news coverage has addressed. Lynette Hooker was 55 years old. She was from Michigan.
She and her husband Brian had been together for years, and by many accounts their shared passion was the water, sailing, boats, the open ocean. The kind of life that takes real commitment to build. They owned a yacht. They named it Soulmate. They were experienced sailors.
And on the night of April 4th, 2026, they were in the Bahamas in the Abaco Islands, traveling by small dinghy from Hopetown back to their yacht anchored near Elbow Cay. Elbow Cay is in the Abaco chain, a string of islands in the northern Bahamas known to sailors as some of the most beautiful cruising grounds in the western Atlantic. The people who sail there know the waters. They respect the conditions. And the conditions on the night of April 4th were not good. Richard Cook, the fire team lead with the Hopetown Volunteer Fire and Rescue Team, described the night as pitch dark with no moon, very windy and very rough for a small boat. That description came from someone who was there, who saw the conditions firsthand, and who ultimately led the search. The boat was 8 feet long. Think about that scale for a moment. 8 feet is roughly the length of a standard parking space. 2 adults in an 8-foot inflatable dinghy are essentially within arm's reach of each other at all times. The boat is small enough that both passengers can touch either side without moving from their seat. Visibility between the 2 people in that boat at any given moment is complete. They are right there, together, in that small space on dark, rough water, heading to their yacht. And then, according to the account, Lynette went overboard. What followed is the account that investigators have been scrutinizing since the moment it was reported. Brian Hooker told authorities, Lynette fell overboard. She was wearing the engine safety lanyard. When she separated from the boat, the lanyard pulled the ignition key and killed the engine. He saw her swimming toward shore, then lost sight of her in the dark. He couldn't restart the engine. He paddled the dinghy toward Marsh Harbor, approximately 4 miles away, in rough, dark conditions. He arrived at a marina around 4 a.m. He reported the incident. Hopetown Volunteer Fire and Rescue was notified at 5:12 a.m. They searched for 6 hours. They found nothing. Lynette Hooker has not been found. Now let's go through what the account required.
Lanyard placement tells investigators who controlled the vessel. That's not circumstantial, Hayes. It's direct evidence.
Piece by piece, because each element of the story depends on specific physical and environmental conditions that can be independently evaluated. The lanyard. We've already established the central inconsistency here, but I want to go deeper on the physical specifics because this is the detail that everything else in the investigation turns on. An engine safety lanyard on an 8-foot outboard dinghy is physically short. 6 to 18 inches is the typical range. It connects the ignition switch, which is mounted on the engine at the stern, to the operator. The operator sits or stands at the stern, close to the engine, hand on the tiller. The lanyard reaches from the ignition to the operator's wrist or life jacket clip. In an 8-foot boat, the passenger sits in the bow or middle, facing either forward or toward the driver. The distance between the passenger position and the engine ignition is greater than the lanyard's designed length. The lanyard is not designed to reach the passenger. It is designed for the driver. There are explanations for how the lanyard could end up on the passenger. Maybe they switched positions at some point during the trip. Maybe Lynette took the tiller briefly for some reason and received the lanyard, then didn't return it. Maybe Brian handed it to her to hold for an unexplained reason. None of these explanations are impossible, but none of them appear anywhere in the account as reported by authorities or as described by Brian himself. The lanyard is asserted as a fact. The reason it was on Lynette is not addressed, and that silence around the most mechanically significant detail in the account is the first thing
He says he saw her swimming. Pitch dark, no moon. Those two things don't coexist.
investigators focused on. The visibility. Brian told authorities, and specifically told Richard Cook, that he saw Lynette swimming toward shore after she went overboard. Then he lost sight of her. Richard Cook described the conditions as pitch dark with no moon. Pitch dark. In those conditions, on the water with rough seas, the visibility of a person in the water from an 8-foot dinghy is severely limited. The ability to determine that a person in pitch-dark water is swimming and to identify the direction they're swimming requires more light than the conditions Richard Cook described. The claim of visual contact sufficient to confirm the direction of swimming, followed by a loss of contact, is in tension with the environmental conditions that Cook confirmed firsthand. The paddling. After the engine died, Brian paddled the dinghy from the location where Lynette went overboard to Marsh Harbor, approximately 4 miles, depending on exactly where the event occurred. An 8-foot inflatable dinghy with an outboard engine is not designed for manual propulsion. Inflatables are buoyant and lightweight, which also makes them highly susceptible to wind and current. Paddling one against rough wind conditions in the dark is physically demanding and directionally unreliable. The account requires Brian Hooker to have paddled successfully to Marsh Harbor under those conditions. Whether investigators observed any physical indicators of that level of exertion when he arrived at the marina, whether he showed the physiological signs of someone who had just spent hours paddling in rough conditions, has not been reported. The timeline gap. The event occurred at night.
7 hours of paddling after your wife goes overboard, paperade. That's a testable claim.
Hopetown Volunteer Fire and Rescue was not notified until 5:12 a.m. The exact time Lynette went overboard has not been established in the public record. Brian says he paddled for approximately 7 hours, according to messages he sent to a friend. If the paddling took 7 hours and he arrived at around 4 a.m., the event would have occurred around 9 p.m. In a maritime emergency involving a person in the water, in rough, dark conditions, possibly without a life jacket, every hour that passes reduces survival probability significantly. The gap between the time Lynette entered the water and the time emergency services were notified is one of the central investigative questions. And this brings us to the messages. Because Brian Hooker didn't only talk to police, he talked to a friend. CBS News reviewed Facebook messages that Brian Hooker exchanged with a friend named Daniel Danforth after Lynette disappeared. Danforth had reached out after seeing news coverage of the disappearance. In those messages, Brian described what happened. He wrote that the wind blew him away from Lynette and that she swam toward the sailboat. He said he drifted and tried to paddle with one oar for the next 7 hours until he washed up on the shore of the next island over. He said he was finally able to get some help. There are details in those messages that differ from the account given to police in specific ways. The message says he paddled with one oar. The message describes the wind blowing him away. The specific language about what he saw and what he did.
What someone says before they've prepared is the most honest version of the account.
Has been examined against the physical account for consistency. The messages are not a confession, but they are a behavioral data point, something Brian Hooker produced in the hours after the event, in informal communication, when his account was less guarded than it would become. And then there's the voicemail. Lynette Hooker's daughter from a previous relationship, Carly Aylesworth, shared a voicemail from Brian with News Nation. The voicemail said, "Hello, honey. I just got a call from Hope."
Monotone and relaxed. That's not the grief category. That's a different behavioral category entirely.
Town search and rescue, and they have found a flotation device that I threw to Mom when she fell overboard. They haven't found her yet, but they can now focus all of their efforts in a smaller area. Aylesworth publicly questioned what she heard in that call. She said he sounded monotone and relaxed. She said it didn't sound like someone who had just lost his wife in a maritime emergency the night before. Behavioral and vocal indicators of acute stress, elevated pitch, irregular breathing, fractured syntax, are typically present in communications made in the aftermath of genuine traumatic experience. The specific acoustic and behavioral characteristics of what Aylesworth described as monotone and relaxed are in contrast with that profile. Brian Hooker's attorney has denied any wrongdoing. He categorically and unequivocally, in his attorney's words, denies doing anything to harm his wife. But the Royal Bahamas Police Force arrested him on April 8th. He had been questioned for over 3 hours. He was asked specifically about the couple's relationship and personal life. He was questioned, his attorney said, in relation to causing harm which resulted in her death. His attorney noted that this questioning suggested investigators were considering a possible murder charge. Brian Hooker was held. An extension was granted. The investigation continued. And then something remarkable.
He went into that water twice, the second time in handcuffs. Investigators don't call that coincidence.
Happened. While in police custody, during a search of the couple's yacht Soulmate, Brian Hooker went overboard a second time. His attorney said he lost his balance while handcuffed, the conditions were choppy and dangerous, and fell into the water. He took in significant water before his life vest pulled him to the surface and police rescued him. A man in custody, handcuffed, fell from a boat into rough Bahamian waters and was rescued. I want to be very careful about how I present that detail. It could be exactly what his attorney described, a balance incident in difficult conditions. But the specific symmetry of that event, a man accused of putting his wife in the water going into the water himself while in police custody, is something that investigators noted. Subscribe to the Obscure Report and turn on notifications. There are more developments coming in this case, and I cover them the day they break. Now let's look at the prior history, because it adds a layer to this case that the account alone doesn't contain. In 2015, a police report from Kentwood, Michigan, documented an altercation between Brian and Lynette Hooker. The report describes what was apparently a domestic situation with conflicting accounts from both parties. Lynette told officers that Brian had choked her. Brian had blood from his nose. Lynette was arrested on charges of assault and battery, though the warrant was ultimately denied due to insufficient evidence about who started the altercation. In the immediate aftermath of a domestic incident with two conflicting accounts, it was Lynette who was arrested. Carly Aylesworth has gone significantly further than the police report. She told investigators that
a prior domestic violence report doesn't prove anything, but it changes the statistical context entirely.
Her mother had previously confided that Brian choked her. She has described the relationship as volatile. She has publicly questioned why her stepfather, in the voicemail about the flotation device that rescue workers found, sounded relaxed rather than devastated. These are allegations. They are not convictions. Brian Hooker has not been charged. The investigation is ongoing. But the 2015 incident and Aylesworth's testimony create a documented pattern of relationship conflict that investigators are required to consider in the context of what happened on April 4th. Let me now present 3 frameworks for understanding what may have happened on that boat, because the investigation has not concluded and the available evidence is consistent with more than one version of events. Framework 1. The account is accurate. Lynette went overboard in rough, dark conditions. The lanyard was on her, possibly transferred during the trip for a reason that wasn't captured in any account, and it killed the engine when she went into the water. Brian saw her swimming, lost sight of her, paddled for hours to get help, and the combination of conditions, no life jacket, rough seas, dark water, and a delayed emergency response meant Lynette was never found. Under this framework, Brian Hooker is a man who lost his wife in a terrible maritime accident and is now being investigated for something he didn't do. His calm voicemail could reflect shock, dissociation, or simply a personality that presents differently under stress. The prior 2015 incident was a single domestic situation.
One explanation requires the fewest assumptions. In my experience, that's the one investigators land on.
11 years ago, not evidence of a pattern. Framework 2. The account contains gaps and errors but not criminal intent. Lynette did go overboard, but the account Brian gave, the visibility claim, the lanyard explanation, the paddling timeline, contains inaccuracies born of acute stress, distorted memory, and a traumatic night rather than deliberate deception. In high-stress situations, eyewitness accounts are frequently incomplete and inconsistent with physical evidence. Brian may have genuinely experienced the night with distress while producing an account that doesn't accurately reflect the sequence of events. Under this framework, the investigation will find inconsistencies, but not evidence sufficient for a criminal charge. Framework 3. The lanyard detail is not a coincidence. Under this framework, the account describes an event that did not occur as stated. The lanyard on the passenger who never drove is not an unexplained coincidence. It is a mechanically necessary detail in a constructed account. Without the lanyard on Lynette, the engine wouldn't stop when she went into the water. Brian would retain power. The circumstances of what followed would be entirely different. The lanyard is the detail that makes the account work. Its presence on Lynette, a person who, by her own daughter's testimony, never operated that engine, is the central question the investigation is working to answer. Under this framework, the calm voicemail, the 2015 incident, the 7-hour gap before emergency notification, and the lanyard detail are all pieces of the same picture. Here is what the public record confirms as of today. Lynette Hooker is still missing. Her body has not been found. Brian Hooker has been arrested and questioned. He has not been charged. The Royal Bahamas Police Force is investigating. The U.S. Coast Guard has opened a criminal investigation. The U.S. State Department has confirmed involvement. Brian Hooker denies any wrongdoing. His attorney has represented him as cooperative with investigators. Lynette Hooker was 55 years old. She loved the water. She and Brian had built a life around sailing. They had a yacht called Soulmate. Whatever happened on the water on April 4th, whatever the truth is, she is still out there somewhere in those waters, and her daughter is still waiting for an answer. The FBI tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI. Tips can also be submitted at tips.fbi.gov. I want to hear from you in the comments on this specific question, and I want your honest analytical response, not just an instinct. The engine safety lanyard is physically designed to connect the driver to the ignition. It is short by design. It is designed for the person at the engine, not the passenger at the other end of an 8-foot boat. Lynette Hooker, by her daughter's clear and unambiguous testimony, never drove that boat. Brian always drove. If she never drove, and the lanyard is designed for the driver, and the lanyard's presence on Lynette is the specific mechanical fact that explains why the engine stopped when she went into the water, what explanation do you find most credible for how it got there? Leave your answer in the comments. I read everyone. Subscribe to the Obscure Report. This case is active. Brian Hooker has not been charged. The investigation has not concluded. Every development will be covered here the moment it breaks. She had the keys. An operator's safety device on the person who never operated. That is the account. Whether the lanyard got there by accident, by transfer, by habit, or by design, is the question that determines what happened to Lynette Hooker on the water in the Bahamas on the night of April 4th, 2026. The investigation is working to answer it.